The HS Perseverance drifted slowly through the darkness of space. Stars glittered in the distance like tiny jewels. The old human warship had seen better days. Its metal hull showed scars from past battles. Paint peeled in some places. Inside, lights flickered occasionally in the corridors. Commander Park stood tall on the bridge, her back straight despite her weariness. She wore the standard Navy uniform, but hers looked more worn than most. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, revealing alert eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes now scanned the tactical display with practiced movements. Section 47B clear, she noted, marking it off her mental checklist. Around her, the bridge crew worked quietly at their stations. Most ships this size would have 15 people on the bridge. The Perseverance made do with 7. Budget cuts, they were told. Resource allocation, the official report stated. Everyone knew the truth. The Axelarian Empire didn't think this ship mattered. Lieutenant Kim sat at the navigation console, his fingers tapping idly. He was young compared to most of the crew, with just enough experience to know their assignment was a punishment, not an opportunity. Another quiet day in the void, Captain, Kim said, not bothering to hide his disappointment. He had joined the fleet to see action, to make a difference. Instead, he found himself mapping empty space at the edge of human territory. Park glanced at him, understanding his frustration. "The Axelarians prefer it that way," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "An ignored human ship causes no trouble." What went unsaid was clear to everyone. They were expected to stay quiet, follow orders, and most importantly, stay out of sight. Humans had joined the galactic community only 30 years ago. The Axelarian Empire had ruled for thousands of years. The power difference was immense. Officer Han monitored communications, her headset slightly too large for her small frame. She had been passed over for promotion 3 times despite perfect evaluations. The reason was always vague. Now she served on what many called the ghost ship. Forgotten, overlooked, irrelevant. Technician Ju worked on a panel that sparked occasionally. The ship's systems were old. Replacement parts were hard to get. The Perseverance had been scheduled for decommissioning 5 years ago. Instead, it received the bare minimum maintenance to keep it functioning and was sent to patrol the least important sector of space. The small crew of 30 continued their duties with quiet determination. They ate together in the mess hall, trained together in the small gym, and shared stories of homes they rarely got to visit. They were the unwanted, the passed over, the overlooked, assigned to a ship the Axelarian Empire had deemed unworthy of concern. "Captain," called Sensor Officer Kang, her voice breaking the silence. "I'm picking up unusual energy patterns in Sector 12G. Park moved to her station, studying the readings. The patterns pulsed in an unfamiliar rhythm, not matching any known technology. "How far?" Park asked. 2 days at standard speed, Captain. Protocol was clear. Unknown readings should be reported to command. The Perseverance should continue its assigned patrol route. The mighty Axelarian warships would investigate if they deemed it necessary. Most times, they didn't. Lieutenant Kim looked up from his console, a spark of interest in his eyes for the first time in weeks. "Shall I send the standard report, Captain?" Communications Officer Han asked, her finger already hovering over the transmission button. Park considered the question. 3 months ago, they had reported unusual asteroid movements. Command had ignored them. Last month, they had discovered an abandoned mining station. Command had ordered them to move on without investigating. Each time, their reports disappeared into the bureaucracy of the Empire, never to be mentioned again. The energy readings pulsed on the screen, mysterious and intriguing. "What do you think, Science Officer Yoon?" Park asked. Yoon studied the readings, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The pattern suggests intelligence, Captain. It's too regular to be natural, but doesn't match any known technology in our database." Officer Han spoke up. "If we report it, Command will just tell us to ignore it, or they'll send one of their own ships to investigate, and we'll never know what it was." added Lieutenant Kim. Park looked around at her crew. She saw the same thing in all their eyes. Curiosity, yes, but something more. The need to matter. To do something meaningful after years of being dismissed and overlooked. The Axelarian Empire treated the Perseverance like an annoyance, a small human vessel to be tolerated and ignored. What the mighty Empire failed to recognize was the dangerous combination of skill and resentment brewing aboard the neglected vessel. Record the standard log entry, Park decided. Unknown energy signature detected in Sector 12G investigating as per Regulation 47.3. Lieutenant Kim sat up straighter. Regulation 47.3 only applies to potential distress signals, Captain. Park gave him a small smile. Does it? How interesting. Set course for the energy signature, Lieutenant. Standard speed. Yes, Captain, Kim replied, unable to hide his excitement as his fingers flew over the navigation controls. Officer Han, prepare a delayed transmission to command. The standard patrol report, noting our course change. Set it to send in 48 hours. By then we'll already be there, Han said, understanding dawning in her eyes. Exactly. We'll investigate first, report after. If it's nothing, no harm done. And if it's something? Asked Security Chief Moon. He had been quietly listening from his station near the door. Then we'll have information to report, not just questions, Park answered. The ship hummed as the engines increased power. For the first time in months, there was energy on the bridge that had nothing to do with the ship's systems. Officer Kang continued monitoring the strange signals. The pattern is changing, Captain. It's becoming more complex. Can you identify it? Park asked. No, but it almost seems like it's responding to our approach. That caused a moment of silence on the bridge. Something or someone was out there, aware of their presence. The Perseverance changed course, leaving its assigned patrol route for the first time in years. The old ship seemed to move with new purpose, as if it too was eager to break free from the monotony of endless patrols. Estimated arrival in 47 hours, Lieutenant Kim announced. Park nodded. All departments prepare for possible first contact scenario. I want everyone at their best. As the crew busied themselves with preparations, Park stood by the main viewport, looking out at the stars. The Axelarian Empire had relegated humans to the sidelines of galactic politics. The Perseverance itself was considered obsolete, useful only for showing the flag in regions no one cared about. Let's see what the Empire doesn't want us to find, Park whispered to herself, watching as the stars seemed to stretch before them as the ship accelerated toward the unknown. The HS Perseverance dropped out of faster-than-light travel with a gentle shudder. The ship slowed to impulse speed as it approached the source of the mysterious energy readings. The bridge crew leaned forward at their stations, eager to discover what waited for them. Full sensor sweep, Commander Park ordered. Her voice was calm, but her eyes showed excitement. Lieutenant Kim guided the ship carefully through a field of small asteroids. Approaching coordinates, Captain. Readings are stronger now. Officer Kang worked at her sensor station. I'm detecting a small planetoid ahead. The signal is coming from just beyond it. Take us around, nice and slow, Park instructed. As the Perseverance cleared the planetoid, the crew gasped collectively. Before them floated a massive Axelarian harvester ship, easily 20 times the size of their vessel. Its dark metal hull absorbed light rather than reflected it, making it look like a hole in space. Extending from its belly were dozens of collection tubes, stretching down to the surface of a small moon. What are they harvesting? Park asked, her voice tight. Officer Yoon adjusted her scanners. I'm detecting life signs on that moon. Thousands of them. Show me, Park ordered. The main screen shifted to show the moon's surface. What they saw made several crew members turn away in shock. The beings on the moon had glowing, translucent bodies that emitted soft blue light. The Axelarian tubes were connected directly to many of these beings, who lay immobile as glowing fluid was extracted from their bodies. They're harvesting them, whispered Officer Han, her hand covering her mouth. Medical Officer Choi pushed her way onto the bridge, having been called when life forms were detected. She studied the images with professional detachment that quickly gave way to horror. "Those organs they're extracting are still connected to living bodies," she said, pointing to the readings. "This isn't mining or harvesting resources. This is extraction from sentient beings." The crew watched as the axillarian tubes pulsed, drawing glowing fluids from the helpless creatures. Some of the beings moved weakly, clearly still alive during the process. "Are we recording this?" Park asked, her voice steady despite the revulsion evident in her eyes. "Yes, Captain. All sensors are capturing data," confirmed Officer Kang. Park stood from her chair. "Take us closer. I want detailed scans of both the axillarian ship and these beings." "Captain," warned Security Chief Moon, "the Harvester hasn't spotted us yet, but if we move closer—" "I understand the risk," Park replied. "Proceed with caution, Lieutenant Kim." The Perseverance moved slowly toward the moon, staying in the shadow of the planetoid as much as possible. As they approached, they could see more details of the scene below. The luminescent beings were humanoid, with slender limbs and large, expressive eyes that now showed only pain. "We're close enough for biological scans," announced Medical Officer Choi, working at a science station. The data began to flow in. The beings, whom Choi tentatively named the Velari based on markings found on artifacts near them, possessed a unique biological makeup. Their organs produced the glowing fluid that the axillarians were extracting. "The fluid appears to have incredible energy properties," Choi explained. "1 liter could power a small city for a month, but the extraction process is killing them slowly." "We must intervene," Choi insisted, her voice shaking with barely controlled emotion. "This isn't harvesting resources. This is torture and murder." Park nodded grimly. "Open a channel to the axillarian vessel." "Captain," Lieutenant Kim cautioned, "if we reveal ourselves—" "I know," Park cut him off, "but I won't pretend I didn't see this." The communication officer established a link to the harvester ship. After several tense moments, the screen flickered to show an axillarian officer. The alien's rigid posture and chitinous features gave no hint of emotion. "This is Commander Park of the HSS Perseverance. We are witnessing what appears to be the forced extraction of biological materials from sentient beings. Please explain your activities." The axillarian tilted its head slightly. "Human vessel, you are outside your designated patrol zone. These activities are sanctioned by Imperial Decree 7729. Return to your assigned quadrant." "These beings are clearly sentient and in pain," Park pressed. "Is the Empire aware of the nature of this harvesting?" "Your concern is noted and irrelevant," the axillarian responded coldly. "These are Imperial matters, not human concerns." The transmission cut abruptly. Park turned to her communications officer. "Send all our data to Axillarian Command and human diplomatic channels. Request immediate clarification on the status of these beings." For 3 hours, the Perseverance maintained position, continuing to record the harvesting operation. The crew worked in silence, their faces grim as they documented the suffering below. Officer Han finally broke the silence. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission. It's from Axillarian Command." The main screen lit up to show Admiral Fax, a high-ranking Axillarian known for his disdain of non-Empire species. His chitinous faceplates clicked as he spoke. "Commander Park of the obsolete vessel Perseverance," he began, his voice dripping with contempt. "Your intrusion into Imperial operations is noted. Your primitive vessel and irrelevant concerns are noted, human. Return to your assigned quadrant immediately." Park stood straight, facing the screen directly. "Admiral, we have documented the extraction of biological materials from living, sentient beings. This violates the Galactic Treaty-Off. The Velari are classified as biological resources under Imperial law." Fax interrupted. "Not sentient beings. Your human sensibilities are irrelevant. The Empire determined sentience, not wayward human commanders in outdated ships. The evidence we've gathered clearly shows. Evidence. Fax's laugh was like stones grinding together. Your primitive scanners and limited understanding are not evidence. The Perseverance is a relic, kept operational only as a courtesy to your species. Return to your patrol route immediately, or face consequences for interference in Imperial affairs. The bridge fell silent as the Admiral's words hung in the air. Park's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. We will comply, Admiral. Perseverance out. As the transmission ended, Park turned to her crew. Her eyes burned with a cold fire that none of them had seen before. Begin recording everything, she ordered. Every detail, every moment. If they won't listen to our words, they'll have to confront our evidence. The crew sprang into action with renewed purpose. Officer Yoon calibrated the sensors to capture more detailed biological readings. Lieutenant Kim carefully repositioned the ship to get better angles of the harvesting operation, while still appearing to be preparing to depart. What exactly are we going to do, Captain? Asked Security Chief Moon. We can't fight that harvester ship. Park looked at the tactical display, studying the massive Axelarian vessel. No, we can't fight them. Not directly. She turned to face her crew. But we won't abandon these beings either. Medical Officer Choi was already analyzing the data. The Velari appear to communicate through bioluminescent patterns. I might be able to establish contact if we get closer to the surface. Too risky, Park replied. The harvester would detect us immediately. What about a probe? Suggested Officer Kang. We could send one down while appearing to conduct standard departure procedures. Park nodded. Make it happen. I want to know everything about the Velari. Their biology, their social structure, their language. Anything that might help us prove their sentience. As the crew prepared the probe, Park stood at the viewport, looking down at the suffering beings below. The Axelarian Empire had dismissed her ship as obsolete, her crew as inconsequential, and her concerns as irrelevant. They believed the Perseverance would meekly return to its patrol route, filing reports that would never be read. They were wrong. Record everything, Park repeated softly. Every detail, every moment. The Perseverance moved away from the moon as ordered, its engines humming softly as it prepared to return to its assigned patrol route. On the bridge, Commander Park maintained a calm expression, but her hands gripped the armrests of her chair tightly. Standard departure vector established. Lieutenant Kim reported, his voice flat and professional despite the anger in his eyes. Maintain course until we're out of their sensor range, Park instructed. Then hold position behind a larger asteroid in Sector 7. The crew exchanged glances but followed orders without question. For 2 hours, they moved slowly away from the harvesting operation. Once they reached the designated asteroid, the ship powered down to minimal systems. Call all senior officers to the conference room, Park ordered. It's time to decide what we're going to do. 10 minutes later, the senior staff gathered around the small table in the conference room. The probe data played on screens around them, showing the suffering Velari in vivid detail. We have 3 problems, Park began. First, we cannot leave sentient beings to be harvested like crops. Second, we cannot openly defy the Empire with our single outdated ship. Third, we cannot expect help from the human fleet, as they won't risk conflict with the Axelarians. So we're helpless, said Security Chief Moon, his expression grim. I didn't say that, Park replied. I said we have problems. Now we need solutions. Medical Officer Choi spoke up first. The probe data confirms the Velari are fully sentient. They have art, written language, and social structures. They're being kept sedated during harvesting, but they're aware of what's happening to them. How many are down there? Asked Lieutenant Kim. Approximately 8,000, answered Officer Yoon, though many seem too weak to survive much longer. The room fell silent as they contemplated the magnitude of the situation. Saving 8,000 beings from an Imperial harvester seemed impossible for their small crew. What about their biology? Park asked. Can they survive off their moon? Yes. Choi nodded. Their biological needs are simple. They absorb energy through their skin, similar to plants. Any environment with sufficient light would sustain them. Chief Engineer Lee had been quiet until now, studying the ship schematics on his tablet. He looked up suddenly, his eyes bright with an idea. They've overlooked something critical, Captain, Engineer Lee said, his hands moving excitedly over the ship's schematics. Our outdated reactor. It operates on principles their sensors can't detect. Everyone turned to look at him. The Perseverance's reactor was indeed unusual, an experimental quantum fluctuation drive that had been installed for testing before newer designs were chosen for the fleet. Explain, Park prompted. The newer ships use standard matter-antimatter reactors. Easy to maintain, reliable, powerful. Our quantum fluctuation drive was deemed too unpredictable for fleet-wide adoption. Lee's fingers traced the reactor design, but the Axelarians calibrate their sensors to detect standard reactor signatures. Our drive operates on completely different principles. Park leaned forward. Are you saying they can't detect us? Not exactly, Lee clarified. They can see us visually and with standard mass detectors. But if we modify our approach, he looked to Weapons Officer Ba. Ba caught on immediately. We can modify the thrust signature, he suggested, eyes widening with possibility. Make us invisible to their tracking systems. That's still not enough, Security Chief Moon pointed out. Even if they can't track us, we're still one small ship against a harvester. We have no weapons that could penetrate their shields. Park nodded, considering this. What if we don't need to fight them? What if we just need to get past them? The officers looked at each other, seeing where this line of thinking was headed. A rescue operation, Lieutenant Kim said softly. Exactly, Park confirmed. If we can approach undetected, we might be able to evacuate some of the Velari before the Axelarians realize what's happening. Even with our shuttle bay, we could only transport a few hundred at most, Officer Han pointed out. Then we make multiple trips, Park replied, or we find another solution. But first, we need to confirm Engineer Lee's theory. Can we really become invisible to their sensors? The next 12 hours were a flurry of activity. Engineer Lee and his team worked non-stop, modifying the quantum fluctuation drive to emit a signature that would confuse Axelarian sensors. Weapons Officer Bai reconfigured the ship's shield harmonics to absorb rather than deflect sensor sweeps. Meanwhile, Medical Officer Choi and Science Officer Yoon studied the Velari biology, determining the best way to safely transport the weakened beings. The Perseverance's small medical bay was converted to accommodate their unique physiological needs. Commander Park watched her crew work with pride. They moved with purpose and determination, their earlier despair replaced by focused energy. The ship that had been relegated to forgotten patrol duty was coming alive with innovation and hope. 3 days later, they were ready for the first test. The Perseverance eased out from behind the asteroid, running on minimal power with its newly modified systems. Approaching sensor range of the harvester, Lieutenant Kim reported tensely. Everyone on the bridge held their breath as they waited for alarms to sound, for the harvester to turn its attention toward them. Nothing happened. Their sensor sweeps are passing right through us, Officer Kang reported with barely contained excitement. As far as they're concerned, we're just background radiation. A cheer went up from the crew, quickly hushed by Commander Park. This is just the first step, she reminded them. Now we need a rescue plan. Over the next 3 weeks, the crew of the Perseverance worked in shifts, continuing to modify their ship while maintaining radio silence. The quantum fluctuation drive was further refined to allow for quick bursts of speed without detection. The shuttle bay was expanded by converting cargo space, allowing for more evacuation capacity. Officer Yoon established rudimentary communication with the Velari through light patterns, using the probe they had left behind. The beings were initially suspicious, but desperation led them to hope. They provided crucial information about the harvesting schedule and which of their people needed immediate evacuation. The Axillarians rotate harvesting zones, Officer Yoon explained, showing the pattern on a display. They move to a new area every 48 hours, giving the previous zone time to recover before they return to it. So we have a window, Park noted, studying the pattern. When they move to the far side of the moon, we can approach the resting zone undetected. The plan took shape. The Perseverance would approach during a zone rotation, using its modified systems to avoid detection. They would evacuate as many Velari as possible, prioritizing the weakest and youngest, then retreat before the harvester completed its rotation. The question of where to take the rescued Velari was solved when Officer Han discovered an uninhabited planet 3 light-years away. It had suitable conditions and was outside regular patrol routes. On the 22nd day since discovering the harvesting operation, the Perseverance was ready. The crew was exhausted but determined. They had converted every available space to temporary housing for the Velari. Medical Officer Choi had prepared treatments for the most severely injured. Harvester is rotating to Zone 6, Officer Kang reported. We have approximately 4 hours before they return to Zone 1. Commander Park stood from her chair. Take us in, Lieutenant Kim. Nice and steady. The Perseverance glided silently toward the moon, its engines emitting only the modified signature that rendered it invisible to Axillarian sensors. As they approached, they could see the Velari gathering at the designated evacuation point, their weak bodies glowing dimly in the darkness. Shuttle bay ready, reported Security Chief Moon. First evacuation team standing by. Park nodded. Begin operation. The shuttle descended to the surface, landing gently among the waiting Velari. The beings moved slowly, assisted by the human crew members who had volunteered for the ground mission. Some were so weak they had to be carried. Through 5 rotations, the shuttle made trip after trip, bringing groups of 20 Velari at a time to the waiting Perseverance. The ship's corridors filled with the soft blue glow of the rescued beings. Final group aboard. Security Chief Moon reported finally. 217 Velari evacuated. It wasn't 8,000, but it was a start. And most importantly, they had done it without alerting the Axillarian harvester. The enemy never saw them coming until the Velari prisoners were already being evacuated to safety. As the Perseverance slipped away from the moon, Commander Park looked at the rescued Velari being tended to by her crew. The being's grateful light patterns pulsed gently throughout the ship. Set course for the safe planet, she ordered, and then prepare to return for the next group. The old, overlooked warship moved silently through space, carrying its precious cargo to safety. The Axillarian Empire had made a critical mistake in dismissing the Perseverance as obsolete. They had overlooked the most dangerous weapon of all, a crew with nothing to lose and everything to prove. The supply shuttle docked quietly with the Perseverance, transferring essential medical supplies and food rations. Captain Ryu of the HSS Dauntless kept his communication brief. Officially, we never met, Ryu said, his image flickering on the small secure channel. Officially, the Dauntless is conducting standard patrols in a completely different sector. Commander Park nodded in understanding. And unofficially? Unofficially, there are a lot of captains impressed with what you're doing. Ryu's stern expression softened slightly. We've included some shield harmonizer upgrades in the supply transfer. They might help with your project. Thank you, Park replied simply. Just don't get caught, Ryu warned before ending the transmission. 3 months had passed since the first rescue operation. The Perseverance had completed 7 more missions, each more daring than the last. They had rescued over 1,500 Velari from the harvesting operations, transporting them to the safe planet they now called New Light. Lieutenant Kim guided the ship away from the rendezvous point, careful to maintain the modified energy signature that kept them invisible to standard Axillarian sensors. Course laid in for the Kilari system, Captain, he reported. Estimated arrival in 26 hours. Park nodded. The Kilari system housed another Axillarian harvesting operation they had discovered with help from their Velari allies. Each rescue strengthened their intelligence network, as grateful Valari shared everything they knew about Axelarian operations. Another successful extraction, Communications Officer Han announced, monitoring Axelarian channels that buzzed with confusion and mounting anger. Listen to this. She put the intercepted communication on speaker. The Axelarian commander's voice was tense with frustration. Third unexplained disappearance this cycle. Security measures have been increased, but harvesting quotas are now 15% below targets. High Command demands answers. Park allowed herself a small smile. The Empire was feeling the effects of their operations, though they still refused to acknowledge the true cause. They've increased security at the Kilari location, Officer Han continued. Double patrols and additional sensor buoys. Will our modifications still work? Park asked, looking to Engineer Lee. Lee had dark circles under his eyes from working endless shifts, but he nodded confidently. The shield harmonizers Captain Rio provided will help, and I've made further adjustments to our drive signature. We should remain undetectable. In the makeshift laboratory that had once been a storage bay, Medical Officer Choi worked alongside 3 Valari who had volunteered to stay aboard the Perseverance. The aliens' natural bioluminescence provided perfect lighting as they analyzed data from the harvesting operations. We've identified 27 harvesting sites across 12 systems, Choi reported when Park visited the lab. The Valari believe there may be more that they don't know about. One of the Valari, who had taken the name Luma, approached Park. The alien's translucent skin showed the gentle pulse of internal organs, now healing after the trauma of partial harvesting. Luma communicated through a pattern of light pulses that the ship's computer translated. My people at New Light are recovering strength. Luma's translated voice came through the speaker. Many wish to join your fight against the harvesters. Park had initially been reluctant to involve the rescued Valari in their operations, but she had come to respect their determination. We welcome their help, but only if they're strong enough. The Axelarians have harvested our people for generations, Luma replied. We have waited for someone to see us, to recognize our pain. You have given us more than rescue. You have given us hope. The Perseverance continued its covert operations, growing bolder with each success. The Empire had dispatched additional patrols throughout the sector, still refusing to acknowledge that a single human warship could cause such disruption. They blamed system malfunctions, natural migrations of the resource species, even sabotage from rival factions within the Empire. Their denial became the Perseverance's greatest advantage. The crew gathered in the mess hall to celebrate their 10th successful mission. The room glowed with the gentle light of the Valari, who had chosen to remain aboard and join their cause. The mood was cheerful but determined. To the forgotten ship and its overlooked crew, Lieutenant Kim toasted, raising his cup of synthetic coffee. May we remain forgotten until the perfect moment, Park added with a wry smile. Security Chief Moon, normally the most cautious of the senior staff, spoke up. We're making a difference, but we're still just one ship. How long can we continue before they finally track us down? The question sobered the gathering. Despite their successes, they were still outnumbered and outgunned. If the Empire ever focused its full attention on finding them, their chances of survival were slim. We don't have to do this alone anymore, Park replied. She nodded to Officer Han, who activated the large display screen on the wall. The screen showed a map of the sector, with dozens of small lights blinking across multiple star systems. What are we looking at? Asked Engineer Lee. Resistance, Park answered simply. Each light represents a group that has joined our cause in the past month. As the crew watched in amazement, Officer Han explained. The Valari weren't the only species being exploited by the Empire. We've made contact with resistance groups on 7 worlds. Some have been fighting in isolation for years, not knowing others were doing the same. The Perseverance has become a symbol, Park continued. The overlooked ship that dared to challenge the Empire. Our success has inspired others to act. She touched the screen, highlighting several key systems. The Gadari in this system have sabotaged 3 mining operations. The Krith here have disrupted communication relays. And most importantly, 2 human colonies in these systems have begun quietly supporting resistance efforts. Security Chief Moon looked skeptical. Human colonies risking Empire retaliation. The colonies have always chafed under Empire rule, Park explained. They've just been waiting for a sign that resistance is possible. Over the next weeks, the Perseverance became more than a rescue ship. It became the center of a growing network. Officer Han worked tirelessly to establish secure communication channels between resistance groups. Engineer Lee shared their sensor-evading technology with other ships willing to join their cause. The Velari proved especially valuable allies. Their natural ability to absorb and emit energy made them excellent at disrupting Axelarian systems without detection. Small teams of recovered Velari volunteered for missions to other harvesting sites, helping to free their people and sabotage operations from within. The Empire's response grew increasingly frantic. Additional warships were deployed throughout the sector. Harvesting operations were consolidated and heavily guarded. Punitive measures were taken against worlds suspected of harboring resistance. Yet still they refused to acknowledge the true nature of the threat. In intercepted communications, Axelarian commanders blamed natural resource depletion and technical malfunctions rather than admit that their supposedly inferior subjects were successfully opposing them. They still think we're insignificant, Park observed as reports of coordinated strikes filtered in from across the sector. Their arrogance will be their downfall. The Perseverance was docked at a hidden asteroid base, receiving much-needed repairs after a close call with an Axelarian patrol. The base had been established by mining colony dissidents years ago and had remained undetected thanks to its location in a dense asteroid field. Representatives from 12 resistance groups had gathered in what had once been a mining operations center. The room was filled with diverse species, all unified by their opposition to Empire exploitation. Park stood before them, still uncomfortable with her emerging role as a resistance leader. Our individual actions have hurt the Empire, but not enough to force change. We need to coordinate our efforts. A Krith representative, his crystalline body reflecting the room's lights, spoke up. My people can disrupt their communication networks, but only temporarily. The human colonies can provide supplies and hiding places, added a colony representative. But we can't openly oppose the Empire. We don't need any single group to do everything, Park explained. We need all of us working together in a coordinated strike. The planning session lasted for days. The Perseverance's crew shared everything they had learned about Axelarian weaknesses. The Velari provided detailed information about harvesting operations. The Krith offered their expertise in communication disruption. Together, they developed a plan that would target multiple Empire operations simultaneously. As the meeting concluded, Park returned to the Perseverance feeling both hopeful and terrified by the scale of what they were planning. On the bridge, she found Lieutenant Kim studying the latest intelligence reports. "Do you think it will work, Captain?" he asked quietly. Park looked at the tactical display, showing the positions of Empire forces across the sector. The Axelarians still had overwhelming advantages in numbers and firepower, but they had one critical weakness. "They still don't see us," she said. "All these months, all these operations, and they still refuse to believe that their supposed inferiors could challenge them. That's why we'll win." On the main screen, reports continued to come in from resistance cells across the sector. The Empire's harvesting quotas had fallen by 30%. Supply lines were being disrupted. Communication outages were becoming common. And at the center of it all was the Perseverance, the ignored human warship that had started it all. The Perseverance hung in space near the edge of the Velari system, almost unrecognizable from the ship it had been a year ago. Its hull was now covered with irregular plates salvaged from abandoned mining stations. The once standard engine nacelles had been modified with Krith crystal technology. Velari bioluminescent patterns pulsed along its sides, constantly changing to confuse Axelarian targeting systems. Inside, the bridge looked equally transformed. Additional control stations had been added to accommodate their multi-species crew. Velari light panels replaced the standard illumination. Krith communication crystals enhanced their sensor array. Commander Park stood at the center, studying the tactical display. Around her, humans worked alongside representatives from 6 different species. What had begun as a single ship's act of defiance had grown into an alliance that spanned the sector. Status report, Park requested. Lieutenant Kim, now serving as tactical coordinator, responded first. All ships report ready, Captain. 37 vessels in position across the system. 37 ships. Not a large fleet by Empire standards, but each vessel had been carefully modified with the same technology that had kept the Perseverance hidden for so long. Some were former merchant vessels. Others were mining ships converted for combat. A few were actual warships provided by human colonies that had finally declared open support for the resistance. Officer Hand looked up from the communications array. All resistance cells report ready. Communication disruption will begin on your mark. What about the Empire fleet? Park asked. Security Chief Moon gestured to a section of the display showing the massive Axelarian presence. Exactly where we want them. 23 warships, including Admiral Thax's flagship, all gathered to protect the main harvesting facility. For months, they had leaked false intelligence suggesting a small resistance attack on a minor outpost. Meanwhile, they had quietly gathered their forces for something much bigger, the liberation of the Velari homeworld. Park took a deep breath. A year ago, she had been the commander of an overlooked patrol ship assigned to the emptiest region of space. Now she led an alliance that would challenge the Axelarian Empire directly. The weight of responsibility was enormous. Begin the operation, she ordered. Throughout the system, resistance ships activated their specially modified drives. The Krith began their communication disruption, sending confusing signals through the Empire's network. On a dozen worlds, carefully placed operatives initiated synchronized sabotage of critical Imperial facilities. The Perseverance led a group of 8 ships toward the Velari homeworld, their modified signatures making them appear as simple sensor ghosts to Imperial scanners. As they approached, they could see the massive harvesting facility in orbit. Thousands of collection tubes stretched down to the planet's surface. They'd increased production, Medical Officer Choi noted grimly. They must be trying to make up for the lost harvests at other facilities. Luma, now serving as the Velari liaison officer, turned her glowing form toward Park. My people below are ready. They await only your signal. The past year had been one of careful planning and resource gathering. For every Velari they had rescued, they had left others behind. Those strong enough to survive and willing to wait for the right moment. These hidden resistors had been secretly organizing, preparing for this day. Take us into position, Park ordered. Prepare the broadcast. Over the past year, they had collected evidence from every harvesting facility they had raided. Videos of Velari being harvested while still alive. Records of other species being exploited across the Empire. Documentation of Imperial atrocities that most citizens of the Empire never saw. The small fleet of resistance ships moved into their assigned positions around the planet. On the Perseverance's bridge, tension mounted as Imperial patrol ships passed nearby without detecting them. All ships in position, Lieutenant Kim reported. Park nodded to Officer Han. Broadcast on all frequencies, she ordered as their ships moved into position, and signal the ground teams. The evidence of Axelarian atrocities began playing across every communication device in the sector. The carefully compiled images and data flooded emergency channels, entertainment networks, and even Imperial command frequencies. At the same time, the ground teams activated. On the planet below, thousands of Velari who had been pretending weakness suddenly rose up. Their combined bioluminescence overloaded the harvesting equipment. Collection tubes exploded as they were flooded with unexpected energy surges. Axelarian control centers found their systems overwhelmed by light patterns that disrupted their technology. The Imperial fleet responded with confusion, suddenly facing attacks from directions they hadn't anticipated. As they tried to coordinate a response, they found their communications filled with evidence of their own crimes. Imperial fleet is attempting to regroup, Security Chief Moon reported. They're having trouble coordinating without clear communications. Now, Park ordered. The Resistance fleet decloaked simultaneously, their weapons already locked on key targets. The Perseverance led the attack, firing on the main control node of the harvesting facility. The battle that followed was chaotic. The Imperial ships had superior firepower, but couldn't effectively coordinate. The Resistance ships were outgunned, but moved with perfect synchronization, targeting vulnerable points with surgical precision. Reports flooded in from across the sector. As Imperial control systems failed under the coordinated attack, revolts erupted on hundreds of worlds. Species that had been exploited for generations saw their opportunity and seized it. "Captain," Officer Hand called out, "we're receiving a direct transmission from Admiral Fax's flagship." Park nodded. "Put it through." Admiral Fax appeared on screen, his chitinous faceplates clicking in agitation. For the first time, the arrogant Imperial commander looked unsettled. "Commander Park," he hissed, "cease this futile attack immediately. You cannot hope to defeat the Empire with your pathetic collection of ships." Park stood tall. "Look around you, Admiral. It's not just about our ships anymore." On the tactical display, dozens of new signals appeared as more resistance vessels dropped their cloaking. Across the sector, Imperial facilities reported being overrun by formerly subjugated species. "This is impossible," Fax sputtered. "How could you coordinate such an attack?" "You gave us plenty of time to prepare," Park replied. "All those months when you refused to believe that your perfect empire could be challenged by those you considered inferior." The Perseverance shook as it took a direct hit from an Imperial destroyer. Damage reports flashed across secondary screens, but the ship's enhanced shields held. "Target the flagship's propulsion systems," Park ordered. "Let's end this." The battle continued for hours. Imperial ships fought with increasing desperation as more of their systems failed. The Resistance suffered losses, but their coordination and determination gave them an edge that surprised even their own commanders. The turning point came when 3 human warships arrived from the nearest colony world, openly declaring their support for the Resistance. The additional firepower tipped the balance decisively. Admiral Fax's flagship, the massive Imperial warship Dominion, found itself surrounded. Its shields flickered as Resistance ships targeted the same sections repeatedly, using the attack pattern Engineer Lee had designed specifically for this moment. "Their shields are failing," Lieutenant Kim reported, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. On screen, Admiral Fax's final transmission displayed genuine shock as his flagship's shields failed. "How?" he demanded. "You're just one insignificant human ship." Park's reply was calm as she ordered the final salvo. "That was your mistake. You should never have ignored us." The Dominion's main power core went dark as precision strikes disabled its key systems. Across the sector, Imperial forces found themselves without leadership or coordination. Some fought on. Many surrendered when they realized the extent of the uprising. On the Velari homeworld, the massive harvesting facility fell as its support systems failed one by one. The tubes that had drained life from the planet for generations collapsed, never to rise again. 3 days later, the fighting had largely ended. Imperial resistance collapsed faster than anyone had expected. Without their carefully maintained control systems and communication networks, the Empire had been unable to mount an effective defense against the coordinated uprising. Park stood on the observation deck of the Perseverance, looking out at the Velari homeworld. The planet glowed with the natural light of its people, now free for the first time in generations. Behind her, representatives from 24 worlds gathered in what had once been a simple briefing room. Human colony leaders sat alongside Velari elders, Krith communicators, and representatives from Species Park had never even heard of before the resistance began. "We need to establish a transitional government," one of the human representatives was saying. "Something to maintain order until permanent arrangements can be made." "And safeguards," added a crystal being, to ensure no one species can ever dominate the others again. Luma, now recognized as a leader among her people, glowed brightly. We must remember what brought us together. Not just opposition to the Empire, but recognition of each other's worth. Park listened to the discussion with mixed emotions. They had succeeded beyond her wildest expectations, but the cost had been high. Ships lost, lives sacrificed, and now the even harder work of building something new would begin. Lieutenant Kim joined her at the viewport. They're calling for you inside. They want the commander of the Perseverance to lead the Provisional Council. Park shook her head. I'm not a politician. I'm just a ship captain who couldn't follow orders. Kim smiled. That's exactly why they want you. Park took one last look at the liberated planet below. The Perseverance had started this journey as a forgotten ship with an overlooked crew. Now it had become a symbol of how determination could overcome even the greatest odds. In the aftermath, as representatives gathered to form a new alliance of free worlds, the Perseverance stood as a monument to how a single overlooked vessel had brought an empire to its knees. Park squared her shoulders and turned toward the meeting room. The ignored human warship had changed the galaxy. Now it was time to build something better from the ruins of empire.